My beloved chosen one, have you ever found yourself looking into the eyes of someone who once felt safe, only to feel like you're no longer standing in front of the same soul? There's a silent kind of heartbreak that happens when someone close to you begins to change, not slowly, not naturally, but in a way that feels like something sacred has been hijacked. You begin to feel confused, emotionally drained, and spiritually torn. Not because you stopped loving, but because the energy between you no longer aligns with what you once knew. It's as if something else is speaking through them now. Something that knows exactly how to reach your most vulnerable places, not to heal them, but to exploit them. And deep inside, your spirit starts whispering, "This is not who they used to be." At first, you question yourself. You wonder if you're being too sensitive, too harsh, or too suspicious. You try to rationalize the shift, to find the thread that might explain their coldness, their contradictions, the growing emotional chaos that seems to orbit around them. But no explanation satisfies the feeling. Because what's happening isn't logical, it's spiritual. And what most people never realize is that when you carry a divine frequency, you don't just attract love, you attract attacks disguised as love. Sometimes, when a person allows fear, pride, or unresolved wounds to dominate them, they unknowingly become vessels for something else, something darker. And if you're not careful, that energy begins to target you through the very person you thought would protect you. If you've been through this kind of emotional confusion, the kind that feels more like a haunting than a heartbreak, I want you to know you're not crazy and you're not alone. Your intuition has been trying to alert you, not to judge or condemn, but to protect your soul. Stay with me through this message, because today we're going to name what's been hidden, bring clarity where there was fog, and most of all, restore the power that was being quietly drained from you. And if your spirit already recognizes this truth, take a moment now to share your voice in the comments right now by writing, "I choose clarity over confusion." And let this be the beginning of your liberation. Take advantage of this moment of action and, like the video, create your own on the channel and activate the notification bell to further strengthen this message. There are spiritual attacks that come in obvious forms: betrayal, slander, directed rejection. But then, there are those that hide behind affection, behind shared memories and soft apologies. And those are the most dangerous ones. Because when the attack comes through someone you love, someone who once made your soul feel at home, it doesn't hit your defenses. It slips through them. You don't brace for impact because you didn't expect harm. You were trying to love, to help, to hold on. And that's when it begins. The subtle rewiring of your spirit through confusion, emotional exhaustion, and a growing sense of inner displacement. Somewhere along the way, you started noticing the shift, not just in how they treated you, but in how you began to feel around them. Conversations that used to energize you now leave you empty. Their presence begins to trigger tension, a pressure in your chest, a silence in your intuition that you can't explain. But still, you hold on, because you remember who they were before. You remember their heart, their light, their essence, and you believe, deeply, that love can bring them back. But what if the very energy you're using to love them is being siphoned and used against you? Spiritual possession isn't always theatrical. Sometimes it's emotional. Sometimes it's psychological. Sometimes it looks like someone you trust slowly turning into someone who gaslights your truth, questions your intuition, and drains your peace, all while claiming to care for you. And because the change is subtle and slow, you begin to doubt your own perception. You think you're the one overreacting, when in truth, your soul is screaming for you to pay attention. What you're sensing isn't just behavioral, it's energetic. And deep down, you know something sacred has been breached. The most painful part is that you tried to save them. You tried to be a light. You tried to pray, to reason, to hold space. You believed that if you stayed long enough, loved hard enough, sacrificed deeply enough, they would return to themselves. But what you didn't realize is that the person you were trying to reach was no longer standing in front of you. And in your attempt to pull them back into the light, you were being pulled further into their shadow. That's how spiritual sabotage works. It doesn't always fight you openly. Sometimes it invites you into its web through love, and in that web, you started to lose pieces of yourself, your clarity, your joy, your sense of direction. You woke up tired, even after resting. You found yourself second-guessing decisions, shrinking your voice, playing small to avoid conflict. You weren't just emotionally confused, you were being spiritually drained. And the one draining, you didn't even look like the enemy. That's what makes this kind of attack so difficult to recognize. It feels like loyalty. It feels like patience. It feels like unconditional love. But it's not. It's bondage disguised as connection. It's important to say this: what happened to you wasn't your fault. You weren't weak. You weren't naive. You were loving from a pure place. But sometimes, when someone allows lower energies to control them, when they open the door to bitterness, jealousy, fear, or unhealed trauma, those energies don't just stay inside them. They begin to seek out what is pure, what is powerful, what carries divine frequency, and they try to bind it. That's what happened to you. Not because you were broken, but because you were bright. And now, your spirit is asking for something different. Not to fix what has already been distorted. Not to chase someone who no longer reflects who they were. But to recognize that the battle you were caught in was never yours to fight alone. Something deeper was playing out behind the scenes, and now it's time to understand what that really was. When a bond is spiritually hijacked, the confusion it causes is not just emotional. It penetrates the very foundation of your discernment. You begin to question everything: your decisions, your worth, your voice, even your connection to the divine. And because the person who now drains you still wears the face of someone you once loved, the conflict inside becomes unbearable. You now feel guilty for pulling away, but crushed every time you stay. You pray for peace, but the atmosphere gets heavier. The smiles feel hollow, the conversations disjointed, and your spirit starts whispering truths you don't want to hear. This isn't love anymore. Something else is in control. And those whispers grow louder the more you try to silence them. There's a unique kind of suffering that happens when someone becomes a weapon against your purpose. Not by choice, but by surrendering to an energy that seeks to control, not connect. What makes it worse is that you remember their goodness. You remember the warmth in their voice, the depth in their eyes, the way your souls used to align. But now, that alignment is gone. Their presence no longer feeds you, it empties you. And still, you carry hope. Hope that they'll snap out of it, that the spiritual fog will lift, that the version of them you knew will return. But how many times have you tried? How many times have you sacrificed your own clarity just to give them one more chance to remember who they are? By the time you realize what's really happening, you're already exhausted. Not just physically, but spiritually. It's as if your soul has been running in circles, trying to make sense of something senseless. You start losing interest in things you once loved. Your spiritual practices become forced. You feel disconnected from your own essence, like a light, dimming day by day. And that's not a coincidence. When a dark force targets you, it doesn't just aim to destroy your outer world. It goes for your identity. It knows that if it can distort how you see yourself, it can delay your destiny without ever laying a finger on your circumstances. And the most effective way to do that is through someone you once trusted with your heart. This is where the deepest conflict lives, in the space between compassion and self-betrayal. You don't want to abandon someone who's suffering. You see their potential, you see their wounds, you understand their pain. But there's a difference between being spiritually supportive and spiritually manipulated. And somewhere along the way, your love turned into obligation. Your empathy turned into silence. Your light started dimming, not because you lost faith in yourself, but because you were too busy trying to carry someone who had already chosen to sit in the dark. And the more you tried to be their anchor, the more your own roots began to detach from truth. You weren't imagining the pressure. You weren't exaggerating the chaos. What you were feeling was spiritual warfare dressed in emotional intimacy. And that's the most dangerous battlefield. Because it doesn't feel like a fight. It feels like confusion. It feels like tension in your body. It feels like walking on eggshells. And yet, it's all happening behind the veil. In frequencies, in energies, in invisible agreements that are not being spoken but are being enacted every day. And this is where discernment becomes your weapon. Not judgment, not anger, but clarity. Because once you can name what's happening, you begin to break its power. The hardest part about waking up to this kind of manipulation is the loneliness that comes with it. Who do you talk to when the person hurting you is the one you love? How do you explain a spiritual invasion when everyone else sees only a relationship going through normal struggles? That's what makes this war so isolating. You begin to hide your truth. You smile when you want to cry. You say, "I'm fine," when you're spiritually unraveling. And all the while, your inner voice is begging you to stop pretending, to stop shrinking, to stop sacrificing your spirit on the altar of someone else's refusal to heal. But the truth is, your silence has never served your soul. And now, the time for silence is over. Because what you're sensing, that presence behind the person, that distortion in their energy, it's real. It has a name. It has an agenda. And it knows exactly what it's doing. It saw your light. It saw your mission. It saw your sensitivity. And it knew that the fastest way to sabotage you was to infect someone close. But here's the part that changes everything. It only works if you keep ignoring what your spirit already knows. And something inside you, maybe right now, even in this very moment, is starting to rise. There comes a moment in every spiritual battle when truth pierces through the fog. Not with a shout, but with a quiet certainty. And maybe that's what's happening to you now. After all the confusion, after all the tears shed in silence, your soul is starting to see with different eyes. It's no longer asking for explanations or apologies. It's no longer trying to fix the situation or make sense of someone else's behavior. Instead, it's starting to recognize a deeper pattern, a spiritual interference that was never about love, but about keeping you trapped. This wasn't just emotional dysfunction. It was an assignment to distract, drain, and disempower you. And it nearly succeeded. The entity behind all of this didn't need to destroy you. It just needed to slow you down, delay your clarity, keep you looping in self-doubt. It used someone close to you as a channel, not because they were evil, but because they were vulnerable. It played on their fears, their pain, their ego, their unresolved shadows. And while they believed they were acting from emotion, the truth is that something darker was steering the wheel. And you? You were caught in the middle, a soul full of light, stuck in a war disguised as love. But what that energy didn't account for was your awakening. This awakening isn't loud or dramatic. It's quiet, resolute. It begins the moment you stop blaming yourself for what went wrong and start reclaiming your own intuition. You begin to feel your energy returning, not all at once, but steadily. You begin to speak truths you had silenced for too long. You begin to look at them, not with longing, not with anger, but with spiritual clarity. And in that clarity, you finally understand. The person you were fighting to hold on to no longer exists in the form you once loved. And perhaps they haven't for a long time. That realization is painful. It breaks something open inside you. Not a wound, but a veil. Because now you see the difference between love and attachment, between loyalty and bondage, between helping someone and being spiritually manipulated by them. And even though it hurts, even though the grief cuts deep, there's also freedom in it. Because now, you don't have to keep trying to heal something that was never yours to carry. You don't have to keep praying for someone who made their own spiritual choices that led them away from the light. There is a sacred shift that happens when you stop asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and start asking, "What did my soul need to learn through this?" That's when the power comes back. That's when the light returns. Not because the pain disappears, but because the pain finally makes sense. You begin to see how every ounce of confusion taught you discernment, how every tear planted seeds of clarity, and how the person who was used against you unknowingly became a mirror that showed you exactly what parts of your soul were still waiting to be reclaimed. Let this truth settle deeply. It was never your job to rescue someone who rejected healing. It was never your calling to be the constant lifeline for someone who refused to swim. You were meant to love, yes, but not to bleed yourself dry in the Awifraud name of love. And now that you see the source behind the sabotage, now that the veil has lifted, your spirit is no longer available for manipulation. You've seen too much, felt too much, and awakened too much to go back into blindness. You're not bitter, you're not hard, you're not unforgiving, you're clear. And in that clarity, something powerful begins to shift in the spirit realm. The assignment that was sent to keep you bound starts to unravel. The energy that once clouded your vision begins to lose its grip. And heaven, which has been waiting patiently for your awareness to rise, begins the process of divine reversal. What was stolen from you in confusion is being returned in clarity. What was silenced through manipulation is being restored through truth. And what was delayed by darkness is now being realigned by light. From this new level of awareness, you begin to see patterns that were always there. You just didn't have the language to name them. You start to understand how spiritual warfare isn't always loud or visible. Sometimes it moves through subtle agreements, emotional dependencies, unspoken expectations, and energetic attachments that feel like love, but are rooted in fear. And in that recognition, something within you begins to realign. You stop asking to go back to what was, because you realize what was already out of alignment. Your soul was never meant to stay entangled in a cycle that required you to abandon yourself just to keep someone else comfortable. There's a sacred wisdom that only pain can teach, a kind of clarity that doesn't come from books or teachings, but from experience. And now, you carry that wisdom. You've walked through the storm. You've endured the silence. You've kept your heart open in the midst of spiritual distortion. And even though you were targeted, you were never truly defeated. Because every attack was also a training ground. Every tear was also a signal to the heavens. And now that you see the truth, you're no longer the same person who was being manipulated. You're someone who can't be moved the same way again. What you've been through has changed the way you see everything. Not just people, but energy, motives, and spiritual dynamics. You no longer accept relationships that cost you your peace. You no longer chase connection that demands you silence your intuition. And most of all, you no longer confuse love with spiritual sacrifice. That's growth. That's maturity. That's spiritual mastery. It doesn't mean you're cold or closed off. It means you've remembered who you are. And who you are is someone whose presence deserves truth, clarity, and alignment. Even now, as you reflect on the person who was used against you, there may still be compassion. And that's okay. You can have compassion without re-entering bondage. You can wish them well from a distance while protecting your energy and your path. You're not responsible for how they handle their healing. You're responsible for how you protect your peace. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for both of you is to step away from the spiritual interference and walk fully into the frequency of truth. In time, you'll look back and see that this experience didn't just take something from you. It gave something to you. It gave you discernment. It gave you strength. It gave you a deeper relationship with your intuition and a sharper understanding of what it means to walk with divine alignment. And those lessons will serve you not just now, but for the rest of your journey. Because the more aligned you are, the less susceptible you become to energetic traps dressed in emotional familiarity. You'll also begin to realize that sometimes what feels like a loss is actually a divine rescue. What looks like rejection is redirection. What seems like sabotage is spiritual refinement. The energy that came to derail you was actually used to sharpen you. And now that you've been refined by the fire, you can walk with a different kind of presence. One that sees without judgment. One that loves without enabling. One that stands firm in truth, no matter how sweet the lie may sound. And yet, there's one more truth that must be spoken. Not everyone can walk with you into your next chapter. Some people were only meant to be part of your awakening, not your destiny. And while that can feel heartbreaking, it's also liberating. Because when you release what was never meant to stay, you make room for what was divinely aligned from the start. Not a counterfeit connection, but a soul-level bond that honors your light, not tries to dim it. That's the path you're being called into now. Not back into old pain, but forward into spiritual integrity. The version of you that tolerated spiritual confusion, that begged for breadcrumbs of connection, that internalized someone else's chaos as your own fault. That version of you is dissolving now. It was never who you truly were, only a temporary shape you took on in the hope of preserving something sacred. But sacred bonds cannot exist where manipulation is present. Divine love cannot thrive where clarity is constantly being suffocated. And so, the release is not rejection, it's resurrection. What's leaving your life now is not your destiny falling apart. It's your spirit refusing to participate in a lie. You're being invited back into yourself, back into the strength you thought you lost, back into the clarity that once felt out of reach. You're beginning to hear your own voice again. Not the voice shaped by trauma, not the voice silenced by guilt, but the voice of truth that has always been speaking beneath the noise. And this time, you're not ignoring it. You're not negotiating with it. You're honoring it. That is where real healing begins. Not when others change, but when you remember who you were before their influence distorted your perception of self. Your gifts are returning. Your sensitivity is no longer a wound to be defended. It's becoming your greatest source of power. You no longer need to over-explain your intuition or justify your inner knowing. You can feel when something is off. You can see behind smiles that hide sabotage. You can walk away from what no longer matches your frequency, not out of bitterness, but out of reverence for your soul. This is what happens when the spell breaks. This is what happens when your spirit returns to its rightful seat of authority. And what about them? The one who was used against you? Perhaps one day, they'll wake up too. Perhaps they'll feel the emptiness that follows the departure of divine connection. Perhaps they'll reach for healing when silence is all that's left. But that is not your responsibility. Your role was never to save them at the cost of yourself. You were sent to shine, to grow, to love, and to discern when love becomes bondage. And now that you've seen what you needed to see, your healing no longer depends on their transformation. It stands on your truth alone. You've passed through fire and returned whole. You've looked into the face of false light and survived the distortion. And now, you walk with wisdom, not wounds. You carry clarity, not confusion. And you're no longer waiting for someone to return to who they were, because you're too busy becoming who you were always meant to be. Let that truth anchor you in this next season. Let it remind you, when the old energy tries to call you back, that your soul has already outgrown those chains. You're not the same, and you never will be again. If this message stirred something deep within you, if it named the silent battle you've been carrying for too long, take a moment to speak your freedom into existence. Write in the comments, "I no longer confuse bondage with love." Let your voice be a declaration. Let it mark the end of spiritual manipulation and the beginning of sovereign clarity. And if you feel called to walk this journey with others who are also awakening, strengthen being extraordinary by liking this video, making sure you are subscribed, and activating the notification bell so you don't miss any new content. A special thanks to everyone who supports our channel. If you want to help us continue producing content, you can support us through Buy Me a Coffee, accessing the link in the first pinned comment. And before you go, don't forget to watch the video we recommend here on the screen or the playlist, The Secrets of the Chosen. Each video was made with you in mind, so that you can continue growing spiritually. Thank you for being with us. May God bless you abundantly, and remember, your journey is just beginning, and the best is yet to come.